And with that, I'd like to invite the panelists up to begin our first panel. So a big round of applause, please, for our first panelist, Encik Al-Ishal Ishak, Chairman of the Multimedia Communications Commission. Mahtab Uddin Ahmed, Chief Executive Officer of Robi Axiata Limited. And I think for many of you in Malaysia, probably the highlight, Afzal Rahim, Chief Executive Officer of dotCom. Big round of applause. Because we held the whole event back by 10 minutes so you can arrive in time to be mic'd as well, right? Not to embarrass people, right? Yeah. And finally, but definitely not least, Vaishali Rastogi, Managing Director and Senior Partner, Head of BCG Southeast Asia. Right? So thank you all very much. Thank you for being in the panel. I just want to point out that I'm asking the questions, so I'm not going to take any answers, right? It's a reversal of roles, right? Yeah, exactly. It's very exciting for me. But maybe we can kick off, and everyone's got a different perspective here. I think we'll start with something sort of overarching, right? What is the likely path to take off of 5G that you would see as a critical enabler today? And if we can kick off with Ishal and give us a sense, and we'll go down the line of the panel. Right?
I think to start off with, we'll take the safe line, which is essentially that's why we're doing all the demonstrator applications and projects. And we've sequenced it in a way that showcase, testbed, field trial in a specific location, in this case approximately 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, which is Putrajaya and Cyberjaya here, and then evolve into industry, users as well as licensees. What do you want to do? Which then came the call for collaboration. We're moving into that phase of demonstration projects, outdoor. 3.5 millimeter wave, etc., trying a multitude of technologies, but I think more importantly is the use case for those, from tourism to smart cities, meaning starting with simple high definition cameras and all that, to agricultural IoT, which is done a lot in 4G, etc., as well as fisheries and a few other applications. But these are trials and demonstrations. Along the way, the ecosystem, equipment, etc., is still coming off to fruition. So, for example, I'm a bit late to the game, but I just learned that the 1800 ecosystem is existent as well, and it could be quite interesting. So, many parts of the puzzle, but I think I'll pass it on to my other colleagues at this stage to take it to the next level.
Sure. I think maybe Mahtab, as you sit there as an operator, and I think you regularly get requests from BTRC to accelerate 5G.
Yeah.
What do you think of as the number one item you need to see in place first? Is it demand side? Is it supply side? Is it policies? What are you looking for?
Look, first of all, I think the government has to decide that what's the objective of implementing 5G. Like, in China, so for example, I'm giving a couple of countries have already taken the steps, like Korea, China, Cambodia, and a few other countries. Like particularly in China, a couple of weeks back I was there. The government has set out a very clear vision. The vision is very simple. That is, we want to move ahead faster than anyone else in the world so that they can then take the technical advantage as far as use cases are concerned. So they're talking about taking the global lead of use cases of 5G. And because, keeping that in mind, they're giving a subsidy for each site anyone come up with, like $1,500 per site subsidy they're giving. Similarly, if you look at Hong Kong, they're giving free spectrum. So that kind of action they're taking, keeping clear vision. But now coming back to Bangladesh, Bangladesh has, as a part of a recent election, the agenda was very clear. By 2021 to 23, the government wants to come with 5G. In my view, that's not good enough. It could be a political statement that, okay, everyone is coming up with 5G, I also have to come up with 5G. I think the government of Bangladesh has to give a very clear direction as to what they want to achieve. And I give an example of, again, China Mobile. The slogan they use for 5G, 4G was for digital life, and 5G is for, guess what? For society. I think that's what the differences are. So last point that I'll touch on, Suresh, is the demand readiness perspective. Demand for 5G initially will be limited to industries, communities, the smart city and all this stuff that we talk about. Now, do you need so much of infrastructure to only focus on industries or communities? I think that's where we have to focus on, and that's where we want clarity from the government, clarity from the vendor, and clarity from the infrastructure partner like EDOTCO as well. But it's an integrated approach that we have to look for.
Points. Afzal, how do you see the world, right? Yeah.
So first of all, I think it's important to kiss the hand of the chairman of the regulator.
Yeah, he's right.
Right.
He's always right.
The regulator is always right. But joking aside, I think that in the past year we've had an environment where we've been able to have robust debates and maybe even arguments, Chairman, about how things work. And I know that Ishal and his team at the MCMC these days really enjoy a diversity of views. In that spirit, allow me to offer a divergent view to what's happening. So I wake up most mornings wondering whether or not 5G is the biggest scam since Y2K. Right? At the end of it, and this is the cynical view, forgive me GSMA, this is a battle which started years ago between satellite providers and the FCC, and this potential auction stroke sell-off of blocks of mid-band spectrum 3.6 onwards, which then is all of a sudden this entire, I'm a conspiracy theorist, so forgive me, this entire 5G stuff started, right? 5G for everyone, 5G is going to save the world, 5G is going to stop world wars and all the rest of it, right? I think it's our role as operators to kind of, dampen some of this thinking and say, so what are we doing? Okay, so we're stuck in the middle of what is really a battle for hearts and minds of spectrum. Most consumers don't know that, that's okay. Hopefully that will keep ARPUs up and they'll keep funding networks, that's fine. But between us, friends, as operators and regulators, I think we should be honest what this is about. I'm very glad that the MCMC and the Malaysian regulator, this is my semi-apology, and removing foot from mouth, has allowed us, I think, a very, very explorative sandbox in order for us to decide for ourselves. They've basically, the MCMC and the government has allowed us in Malaysia to extend what we think 5G will be and what we're going to use 5G for. And with the introduction of the National Fiberization and Connectivity Plan last week, also allows for an introduction to what we would call 5G hybrid networks to extend coverage to rural areas, etc., which is close to all of our hearts. What I would say is that I think we're getting caught up in, as operators, we're getting caught up a little bit too much in the hype. 5G is trying to deliver what 4G should have and 3G never did. Let's just be clear from a technical standard. As a DSP engineer or a pretend DSP engineer myself, I'm absolutely shocked in seeing that we haven't moved on from basically where we were. And that's a fact. So we're wrapping it, it's a nice marketing pull. The infrastructure element, I think, is very important. I think one of the things that we're feeling for the first time in Malaysia is that the federal government, led by the ministry and the MCMC, is now going down to work with really removing the real blocked arteries. And the real blocked arteries and these powers sit with municipal councils and local authorities who prevent the rollout of infrastructure because of inefficiency, incompetence, ignorance, or a combination of the above. And so we really need to sort of roll that out. So I suppose what we're saying is we need to match. So there's the hype, which I personally do not believe in, and I'm at a GSMA conference, so I'm going to get killed before I leave the door. Then there is the regulatory framework and the sandbox, which I think is sufficient for Malaysian operators to thrive. So I don't think that the Malaysian operators can now cry and say, we don't have enough spectrum, boss, you're not giving us enough approval, boss, and all these sad stories. I think everyone has got enough to make do for the moment. Perhaps there's an imbalance, but I'm not a spectrum expert. Then there's the infrastructure readiness, and the infrastructure readiness must be based upon, for example, the great work that EDOTCO does in readying stuff, because there's no point us having an environment if our backhaul is incomplete or if we don't have enough fiberization. That was a sales plugin in case you didn't hear that, etc., etc. So I think we need to look at this in a balanced situation. Until then, I do think that 5G is a bigger scam since Y2K. Forgive me.
Great. I knew I had him on the panel for some reason, right? And actually, my apologies to Vaishali because I just read off my script here, but in fact, she's taken a new role. She's actually now the global head of TMT for BCG, which actually puts her in the right position to say, how does Southeast Asia, perhaps, or South Asia think about 5G and the things it needs to do relative to some of the excitement that we see coming out of the US, for example?
So that's a hard act to follow, but if I just, ground us back as well to reality here, I think there are a few aspects I want to highlight, which I think get forgotten in, all the sandboxing we're doing and all the experimentation we're doing and so on. The first is complexity. I think 4G was a relatively simpler element to adopt. There were the MNOs, the operators, there were the technology vendors, meaning the network providers, and there were the devices. And you had a killer use case called video. Pretty straightforward. Everybody knew what they needed to do, and they got going. 5G is a complex beast. It's a complex beast because we're talking about, and Suresh talked about it, and you've probably heard of it. It's, the future lies in B2B applications. Yes, there will be a few consumer applications like AR, VR, more immersive technologies and so on, but the future is B2B. And you've probably heard dotCom has 300 partners that they're cooperating with and so on, and same for DT and so on. So it's a pretty complex beast, and these partners, there are hundreds of them that you have to get going. And by the way, the killer use case is not really apparent today. Yes, there is potential to get to that use case at some point in time, but it's not exactly staring at you right now today. A lot of these applications can be done on 4G as well. So I think that's the first thing, which is complexity. I think the second one that we should just think about is cost, and that has implications for everything, right? From regulatory policy to sharing to wholesale agreements and beyond. In our view, and we've helped so many operators do business casing, including the ones that have launched, etc. The business case is hard, even in developed markets, because the initial cost of a 5G outlay is actually quite significant, even though it adds a lot of capacity. And in this market, with ARPUs that are a fraction of what we've seen elsewhere in the world, it'll be triply challenging. So, we should just keep that aspect in mind as well as we run towards 5G. And then the last point I will talk about is cooperation, which I touched with complexity, which is the other side, which is, and I think Suresh made that the anchor theme in his opening remark, and I can't agree more. I think this is a world of cooperation on all sides. Be it for demand, because you're not going to produce the demand applications yourself, be it on B2B and the partners in the ecosystem there, be it with other MNOs and infrastructure providers. I think cooperation is going to be the name of the game. And this is not something that the industry is generally being used to in the same degree that they will need to do today.
Actually, Vaishali, maybe I can just start with you with the next set of questions, which reflect the question of, there are challenges, I think, in summary, whether it's national policy, ultimate business case, but we have to begin somewhere. And it's hard to describe the region as a region sometimes because there's so many multiple countries. But where would you begin? What use case? Is it the B2B side? Is it just Korea style, more data for everyone, and greater experiences? Where do you think the effort should lie, in this part of the world?
I'll break it into two bits. I think near term, I think it is going to be more consumer demand actually that will yield the monetization. And Korea is different. Look, Korea didn't have unlimited. They went to unlimited using 5G. So it's a very different dynamic, to be fair. The coverage norms that they wanted to get to, etc., versus what they were in 4G. I think it's a very different use case versus this part of the world. But I think fundamentally the consumer side will continue to be important in the near term, but you have to start on the B2B side, even though the monetization, I believe, will come a little later. And I think there will be pinpoints of what I call B2B demand. So when we talk about specific locations, right, you can talk about ports, airports, really what I call pinpoints of demand. where it could start first, and then the broader B2B IoT applications can come into play.
Maybe just turning to Mahtab, because you also have a demand-centric view of the world and what you have to do. Where would you spend if you had to start 5G tomorrow, and let's say most things are in place, where would you put your time and effort?
Look, I will emphasize on one point, that is business case. Like, I don't think there is any business case for third world countries like Bangladesh for a couple of reasons. I can tell you 4 drivers. Number one driver is spectrum price. I don't think in country like Bangladesh, India, the government has, or regulator has come to a sense in terms of what kind of spectrum price they should be charging to make 5G workable. So I think that is the first one comes. The second one comes from your end, because the most likely band that we'll be using for 5G, either C-band or 2.6 megahertz, these are the most commonly used band. It means is more towers are required to give, corporate coverage. Now the question is, can we afford to have additional coverage without incremental revenue, only focusing on B2B or focusing on societies? Third point is, I don't know how much, I think probably you'll be asking it later. The power cost is significantly going to go up. The power consumption will be huge in 5G. If you consider all that vendor, whether it's Huawei or Ericsson, I can sit out here, they have spent a lot of money on R&D to develop the 5G technology. They will try to milk as much as possible out of operators. If I take that 4 or 5 factors, I don't see any business case, whatever liberal, whatever sympathy all these 5 parties shows to us, it may not be enough to make business case positive from the day one. So therefore, if I say what I expect and what I want to see, I want to see all these 5 parties show sensibility. And when I say 5 parties, government or regulator, vendors, infrastructure company like EDOTCO, on all these relevant parties has to come together, real collaboration, not just talking about it. I think then we can work out a winning solution.
Okay, no, I think that's interesting. Maybe it's a good point to bring Ishal back into the picture here. In a sense, one of the things you touched on, spectrum pricing, So maybe a couple of questions for you, Ishal. From a policymaker point of view, what do you want to see as the first flourish of 5G? And then what are the policies on spectrum or other things that you feel need to be put right, And maybe from a Malaysian perspective is what you can provide. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Suresh. I think there's a reason why you brought Afzal here.
Yeah. That's why I left it for the last. Yeah. He's going to do the rebuttal to what I'm going to say, right?
Our license bill was signed last week. It hasn't been signed, sir?
Depends on what happens today. Anyway, in good spirit. I think now, again, very much in tune to being the contrarian. I grew up in the internet generation of the 90s. You'll be surprised. And the discussions that we're hearing on stage today is reminiscent of 1995, 1996, when the internet, as it were, came into being. What's the business case? It's too early. We don't have to be first. But in Comdex 1996, which is in Las Vegas in November, I think, I was there on the staircase listening to Microsoft finally embracing the internet. So the point that I'm trying to make is you cannot look at the future, cross the chasm with the set of old rules that we're used to. And this is the core issue that we have today. We, regulators, governments, industry, etc., are looking at what we know, which is FWA, fixed wireless access, as maybe the initial easy bits of getting it into place. But some of you may know my favorite story. Having gone around the country in 3 months from May 16th to August 11th or something, 2 locations. One, Kota Baru, Kelantan. Kota Baru is in the east coast of Malaysia. Landed at 10 p.m., got into hotel at 11:30, 4 speed tests, 250 megabits per second, 89 megabits per second, 150 megabits per second, surprise, put on my pants, went out on the street, another speed test, 150 megabits per second in Kota Baru. Yeah, in Langkawi, at the airport, landed, waiting for the bag, speed test, 28 to 6 megabits per second. And that's the home of the Prime Minister. Right? Why do you think we're bringing 5G to Langkawi? I'm just joking. So, we have the huge potential of 4G, granted, agreed, fully agreed, which has not been maximized yet. I think approximately, Suresh knows better than I, 30% of towers in the country.
Yeah, about 30% fiberized.
Fiberized. So we've got 70% more to go to get there. So optimization continues. And I think the key goal is some of the things we'd like to see happen beyond the basic spectrum, etc. I think Alban alluded to the fact that the spectrum will be there. As you saw, some of you were here this morning, we've had a roadmap. And our roadmap, I think, is quite spot on, together with the global evolution of ecosystem, etc. But I think the mindset change has to begin here. The collaboration, I think, again, no big secret. I've been talking to all our licensees, telcos, friends, from the mobile to the fixed guys over the last 1 year that I've been here. And I've been asking them, what are your problems? What are your challenges? So this is not a paradigm, a domain where government or regulators lead. Operators, users will lead this change, this shift, right? Policies, etc., can be adjusted. We have very broad, I think, fairly enlightened and supportive policies. But it's the mindset. So with that, I'll just pass it on to Afzal for the next wave.
Yeah, no, I think that's all. So, you know,
I didn't know my license hadn't been signed.
yeah, so, you know, maybe you need to be careful with your answer. But I guess, having heard everyone and being a bit skeptical about 5G and its initial uptake, what would you focus on and what do you want government to help you focus on as well? Or what support do you need apart from signing your license, right?
Okay, just to come back at the back panel, obviously. It's not so much about the hype of 5G or being skeptical about the hype of 5G. I think it is all fine and dandy to sell the Kool-Aid. Just don't drink your own. That's my point, right? So we should continue to sell the Kool-Aid, the hype, and all the rest of it. Just in our own thinking, in our own determinations, we should be a little bit more careful. So, look, I think there's only so much government can do. And I genuinely believe that, I can only speak for the Malaysian context, that the government has done all that they can do to provide the initial, shall I say, boost for industry to now take this forward, right? In the past 1 year, in the past 6 months, we have interacted directly with the chief executives or Menteri Besars of virtually all the states in Malaysia to talk about issues about deployment and, you know, approvals, etc., because the real proof is in the pudding. If you don't dig the road, if you don't mount towers, if you don't put up mounting assets on the tower or somewhere else, you're not going to get anywhere. I think everyone realizes that. And for the first time, we've had government lead this charge, you know, if the regulators gone ahead and said, listen, we're going to go and lead this charge, we're going to educate the states and partner with the states and try and help them out. So that's what creates the execution or that execution inertia which we had all these years, hopefully will be broken through these interventions, right? So I think that's the first role of government. Second, I'm not even going to get into the spectrum discussion because I don't quite understand it. The point here is that government will have to allocate spectrum in a manner that it thinks is best, and whether or not that balance is to tax up front or, you know, look at the halo effect ramifications later, that's up to the economic regulators to go and decide. So insofar as government role. I think the third thing is, you know, leading on to what Vaishali said, is the fact that, you know, where is the user case going to come from and what is that user case going to be? So I pee my pants every morning because I worry about the number of consumers out there who are terminating fiber broadband networks for mobile networks in the home, in the urban areas. Let's talk about urban first. And as we know, urban is the most difficult to solve because of density, permeability, blah, 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 site acquisition, and all the rest of it. And I think that the killer use case for 5G, or the litmus test, not the user case, that is going to see whether or not it's worth its metal and worth what everyone is talking about, is when people electively terminate their home broadband service or their fiber broadband service and move on into a 5G environment. I hope that happens in Malaysia. It's bad for my business, obviously. I hope it happens in Malaysia because of the fact that there are so many rural areas that would benefit, or even not semi-rural, not even rural areas, that would benefit from 5G really meeting its promise. And so we should be pushing there. But I'm curious about one particular thing, And this is where I said that whilst government, I think, has provided us with enough latitude, opening, sandbox, and the boost for us to go and progress, and more than we even expected a year ago, what is industry doing about it? It kind of disappoints me that the mobile operators are more concerned about reselling fiber broadband rather than getting ready to beam 5G broadband into homes. That investment and all this investment that we've seen and this fascination with is really essentially a reselling of a fiber service should be focused to setting up mounting assets that will be able to permeate and basically cover streets in suburban areas, even in rural areas. So that fixation I don't quite understand, because surely the money is going to be made from the replaceability. So those are the three bits that I think need to kind of interweave, and I think the operators need to stop drinking their own Kool-Aid.
Okay, so maybe moving on from a question of broadly, is there a case, is there no case, some elements of, whether or not policy are in place. We might turn our attention to the question of, if it is to happen, and happen well, what are the changes that people need to embrace from an infrastructure point of view, right? And I wonder if, Vaishali, again, I turn to you because you've been seeing this across a number of countries. For example, shared networks, for sure, or not, nationalized infrastructure, for sure, or not. What are you seeing, and how do we think our way through the right solution?
So Suresh, there's a macro perspective and then there's a micro perspective. Let me start with the easier question, which is the micro perspective. The micro perspective, I think there will be need for lots of different kinds of infrastructure. You yourself mentioned fiber, and there will be a need for a lot more fiberization. There'll be more, small cells. You'll need sturdier, stations and so on. So there is a need for what I call micro infrastructure. At the micro level, there's a lot more infrastructure that needs to be done. Now, I do believe that collaboration even there is important. Now, what shape it takes, of course, depends market to market, but there is a need for infrastructure at that level. And I call it the micro level. And then the big daddy question is really the macro level. And I think this is really important for the ecosystem to model out and see how many networks can you take in a 3 to 5 year perspective versus the 10-year perspective when everything is hunky-dory. And I get it that you need a mindset change and all that, but you know what? If we do believe that it is not going to be viable to have, all MNOs, all operators, everybody roll out their own network on 5G, then I do think that this is something that needs to be thought through quite carefully versus going down the traditional path that we've been used to. I mean, you've seen Singapore come out with pretty interesting regulations, for example, 2 networks shared among 4 operators with mandatory wholesale. And I do think that in these developing markets, that macro question needs very careful thought. I don't think business as usual would work, actually, in the 5G environment.
Well, I think it's always a good point to always go back to Al-Ishal when someone raises an interesting question like that. Where do you see the role of government in mandating or directing solution as opposed to facilitating? Where do you come out on that?
Will it be held against me?
I have no idea. Right here, you can couch it as your personal opinion, right? My personal opinion, right? Yeah. Correct.
I am mature well.
Yeah.
The truth. So Monday is my year 1. Survive year 1. Year 2 begins Tuesday. From day 1, the government, aka the minister, His Excellency Uddin, and the regulator, ourselves, have been asking for sharing. Because it was simple. The world is heading towards economic turmoil, and foreign exchange resources are going out of the country, and this is 2019 for crying out loud, and we still don't have, I still get drop calls on my way to work every day. 2 locations, almost every operator, right? So where is the point that we should do more? And The question being, whether it's light touch, facilitate, or heavy-handed approach. I think we tried the light touch. We are still facilitating mode right now. So for example, this Friday, there's another meeting happening, by the way. I don't think you're invited. To all the sharing further. And just last night, actually, I was on GSMA website looking at the sharing framework of the GSMA, right? The Mokans, etc., etc., etc. And say, okay, in theory, this is where we are. But the MCMC is 21 years old this year. Now, admittedly and thankfully, our members of industry have been sharing more than most. Nevertheless, we know that we can do more. Now, admittedly as well, EDOTCO has facilitated that. So for example, the small cell event day, I was there, looking at the 100 over 200 meg speed. Yeah, that we were touching at KL Central. So the short answer in that is, we are getting impatient because there's a lot to lose at this point in time where we are trying to cross the chasm together, yet we are still looking at the new world with our old lenses. So that's the IMHO point of view kind of thing. Nevertheless, on the flip side, for the first time in history, and I think Afzal has been a very vocal participant of that, regulator and all the telcos in Malaysia have gone round, as we have intimated earlier, to meet all the state governments, the EXCOs, the local councils, to discuss the challenges. And we have 15 territories or 16 territories with different challenges. We have put our hands and heads together, and every meeting, every engagement is different, because when you talk about infrastructure, it's the right of way here. Unless we're in a country like Korea, where it's a federally mandated or federal government-driven infrastructure, in our case, we need the change to happen at the local council and the state level. But that's not enough. Saying that the change needs to happen does not get the change done. The point of the matter is, the state governments and local councils are looking for a source of revenue, which is why they are taxing up to 18,000 US per site, taking 6 to 8 months per site, asking you to fill out 20 forms and forming their own companies to kind of facilitate, quote unquote, in parentheses, for a fee. So if we want to solve the entire infrastructure conundrum or continuum, I think we need to face the bull head on. On the right of way at the local government, is there a business model for the local governments as opposed to telling them this is not the way to do it? You are blocking progress. We are not going to put sites in your states. That is not a solution. We have to solve the solution, coming back to Vaishal's point earlier, in a collaborative way, a cohesive way, and I think we can progress month by month towards nirvana.
It's his personal opinion, right? Just understands that, right? Yeah, just to be sure. So maybe Mahtab, you're a CEO of one of the largest operators in Bangladesh. You've had tremendous growth over the last 3 or 4 years. Are you ready to adopt a fully shared active network? How do you must be scenario planning this the whole time anyway.
Yeah.
What do you are you ready? What's needed? What will convince you?
Convincing part I've already said in the form of business case. But if you ask us, like one thing what we are doing is whatever investment we have been making, we're ensuring that it is 5G compatible or TDD compatible, like whether it is 2.6 or 3.4. So that part we are trying to ensure so that whenever 5G comes, we don't have to make massive investment in one go. So that is one part we are taking care of. I think our number is pretty much same as EDOTCO number, that 30% of the sites are fiberized. So there also we have made some progress. So if tomorrow comes, no, we have to do 5G, then probably we'll be ready to selectively, in selective areas, we can probably launch 5G with some investment in RRU and few other stuff. So we are not significantly far away in terms of making 5G ready. But again, as I said, the business case has to come out.
I guess the question is, so it sounds like you're quite happy to do your own 5G, or will you think that you'd actually want to create a shared 5G network? What do you think will help you more?
I think the answer is very clear. It has to be shared. We are working with the regulator, and for a change, our regulator has started changing their views. Initially, they said neither Moran nor Mukan they're going to accept. But for a change, I was talking to Rahul a little while ago that they have given an NOC approval for small cell and IBS. Now we are finally there. The garden is at the final still for Moran. So if Moran happens, obviously it's going to, and it's likely to happen. The way the progress I can see on the regulatory side, if Moran happens, it definitely going to create a new opportunity for all of us, and business case is going to be positive as well. So to be positive about the whole thing, I see some positive step towards the regulatory end, which is not very common in Bangladesh, unfortunately. Though absolutely listening to Afzal, I also feel it's no significantly different.
Anything I say is my personal opinion, right?
Malaysia here. But I think there's some positive senses are coming up, and which is going to pave the way for more decent 5G launch. But I don't expect it to be a massive rollout. It will be very selective rollout, whatever it happens. And collaboration is must. Collaboration with the government, collaboration with the MNOs, collaboration with the infrastructure service provider. It's a must to make the business case more sensible than what it looks like right now.
So I've got a whole bunch of questions to ask Sal, but maybe first I'll say, on this question of mandating, on the question of shared networks, any perspective you'd like to provide?
Well, other than the obvious solution to these, to rolling out 5G is nationalize the largest tower company, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. But it'd be great if but I think that we should actually add the second largest fiber company into the mix as well. Then you get a great solution.
Largest, the second largest, well, it must be the largest. So obviously let's nationalize the largest tower company, just to make it easy, so everyone can share infrastructure. Sorry? Food for thought, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the first thing, obviously, Suresh. I think that government needs to do what it has to do. And I think that we have been mucking about with, effectively we have, and this is not a dig at the previous government or anything like that, but we have inherited a suboptimal hand of gin, rummy, poker, mahjong, whatever you want to call it, right? And as a result, we have to do with what we can do. The issue is this: how can we ensure infrastructure investments while still allowing for access and sharing at the same time? And I think this is what Chairman is talking about when he talks about the fact that he's getting impatient. When he says that we tried last light touch for a year, and come Tuesday, it's my second year. I can tell you the wordings that he uses in our industry CEO chat group is rather more direct, right? And the point I'm trying to make with this is that if we can find a formula that promotes the building of infrastructure, the 2.5 million homes in rural Malaysia or semi-rural Malaysia that do not have proper fiber infrastructure. I'm always focused on home infrastructure because wherever home infrastructure has been is basically where 4 5G networks will grow because there's sufficient infrastructure and investment. If we can ensure that people are going to keep investing in infrastructure, yet still open up collaborations, or there's two parts. One is the economic pie. Everyone wants to invest because the returns are better. The second part is avoid duplication, which is really the biggest thing. If we can achieve both those things, then I think we have a ball game. So I'll give you an example. The last 9 years, we've had a squandered opportunity because we had a chance to, 9 years ago or 8 years ago, fiberize the 10,000 or 7,000 schools that we had in Malaysia, yet we went for some stupid wireless technology which didn't work. Right? I mean, it's a fact. Let's call a spade a spade. And so now we're starting again with where we are with respect to what we want to do. So let's make this work. Let's fiberize the schools and therefore look at infrastructure. And if that fiberization is coming with a long-term contract, the person providing the fiber, whether it's us, whether it's Maxis, it doesn't matter, should then have to open up these networks to allow for 5G nodes, etc., etc., etc. But we're not thinking holistically, we're not thinking systematically. And we've lost a few opportunities, right? So in summary, what I'm saying is that the government has got to do what it has to do. If it feels that infrastructure is not being provided quick enough, if it has to mandate an opening, it has. That's what MSAP is all about. right? But how do we now push that infrastructure investment? Because not enough is being done.
I think that's a great point there. You know, one of the questions though is it's always difficult to get an ecosystem going. And in yourself in a very unique situation with time, you know, it's a business that you build over time, as it were. You know, do you see, what do you do? Do you yourself now look at 5G and FWA as an opportunity to grow your business? Do you see an opportunity to step into the breach to provide more shared infra? How do you see things? Because I think traditionally, most people have seen time very much as like a pipes business and a bit of a buildings business, right? So, is this an opportunity? Is it or is it not? I don't know. How are you looking?
So I think first and foremost, if we look at the 4 columns, internally there's certainly no inherent strength that we have with respect to 5G. The opportunity comes from us, first of all, accepting the situation that we're in the ecosystem that we're in. And in our specific case, we're not going to make a killing from 5G. We're not going to make very much money from 5G, but our business model has changed, our ARPUs have reduced elsewhere, etc., etc. So all we're doing is sweating our assets slightly better. So how do we expect to be 5G partners? Well, to be honest, I think, and this is the way we talk about it internally, for every 1 ringgit that we lose because of the technical prowess eventually of 5G, we hope to regain back 66 cents or 2/3 through the provision of infrastructure. But it's still a net loss of 33 cents, and that's fine because that's the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way the industry works. Fixed line has had a good run the last 5 years, and now we are now looking at the end-to-end connectivity, and thus will play a smaller part in it. So I think there is opportunity, but the opportunity is not going to be necessarily a net increase, right? But does it provide us with a more stable environment where again we can deploy more infrastructure? Absolutely. So A, we want to deploy more infrastructure. B, we accept that 5G is going to take away home broadband customers, and it should. I know this is a horrible thing to say, and my shareholders will hate me for saying this, but you can't change the laws of physics or science. You can't stand in the path of progress. 5G should steal home broadband customers. I mean, fiber home broadband customers. So we're worried about that. What can we gain back? About 66 cents to the dollar, I think.
Maybe, you know, we're sort of getting to the end of the panel here, and I think something to think about has always been, hey, maybe there'll be multiple networks or multiple ways to develop a network or deliver a solution, and you know that there may be more private 5G networks or self-built 5G networks. I don't know, Vaishali, whether you think this is a major opportunity, something we should just keep in mind, or a potential disruptor that could actually, you know, revolutionize how 5G is deployed.
So Suresh, that's a good note for some of our closing discussion, because while I do agree infrastructure and all the stakeholders and all that we've discussed so far, policy, regulation, those are all key. I think this time around, operators, the industry really needs to, what I call, you know, really seize the opportunity to find new ways of monetizing, to find new opportunities, and to really be in that forefront rather than just say, I'm really just a connectivity provider. And that also means cooperating with other sectors, be it industry sectors for private networks, be it with government, etc. But I think seizing that opportunity and driving it rather than leaving it for somebody else, I think will be quite important, both on the consumer side and on the B2B side. And I think in all this discussion, we shouldn't forget that, because it requires a different mindset, because it's not just about speed and connectivity anymore. There's a lot more out there, and it requires the operators to go out and seize that as well.
I think, Ishal, is there some thought that MCMC about enabling more private use of 5G? You know, if I want to set one up in my neighborhood, can I do that? And I see ideas like this banded around quite a bit now, and I talked earlier about the fact that you can literally buy the kit off Alibaba or Amazon, build it yourself in the garage if you wanted to, right? Spectrum notwithstanding. So what do you see as
if you're free this weekend, I'll come over and
yeah, no problem. Right? Yeah.
I think the short answer is yes, eventually. There's a medium answer of today we have private LTE already operating in Malaysia. in one or two sectors mentioned by the spectrum holders. The third point is, today we also have dimension the 800 megahertz, 1010 I believe, for the law enforcement agencies, not being utilized yet, and the bit of the 900 megahertz 5.5 I believe, in terms of railway. So technically private LTE, we allow for that, but I think maybe use case, maybe foresight, maybe demand, it's not quite there yet. So private LTE, no issue. 5G, naturally, no issue. But coming back to, I guess, my closing remarks, my closing point is this, and it's not very sweet. So 1 year is up. We've done 2 public inquiries, one on the NFCP, which is November, December last year, and the second recently on the spectrum 700, 2300 and the 2600, July, August this year. The feedback that's been coming in is same old, same old. So while we enjoy the banter, while we are visionary in dreams, but our action from the infrastructure providers, the telcos, etc., where here you have a regulator that says, come boys and girls, tell us what you need. We want to change the world. How do we do this? But the voluminous of inputs coming from the public inquiry, truthfully, hand to heart, has been same old, same old. So I think we need to really ask ourselves, do we really want this change? And if we do, let's do it. Because we have this one chance. This is the window. This is the chasm that we can cross together. My term expires next year. So you've got 1 more year left. Make a change on that note.
A very good note as well. And maybe to Afzal there, what do you, from if you have a summarized view around, infrastructure, or whether it's for 5G or just getting the infrastructure right, what do you think?
I instinctively think that 5G is going to be the solution, which solves our, again, I keep talking about semi-rural connectivity, right? 5G in Terbelo, 5G in Teluk Intan, 5G in Muar, 5G in Kolkata even. I mean, this is where that we should use it. And I think that the issue is that we're also obsessed with our market cap. And we're also obsessed with our valuations. And I think that us telcos have been making far too much money for far too long. And it's time that we put our money where our mouth is. And I speak as a shareholder, so I am shooting myself in the foot. And I think that we should put our money where our mouth is and use this window, as Ishal puts it, to really figure out how we're going to solve fundamentally the digital divide problem. That is, I think, closest to our hearts. I don't blame the chairman for being upset or being disappointed that our voluminous, rather legalistic responses to the public inquiry, are not worth the paper that they're written on. I think so as well, ourselves included. And I think that people are only going to start becoming a little bit more socially conscious and more strategic on a national level when the government cracks the whip. And I think that how the government cracks the whip, I think, is very straightforward. They've now given us the opportunity with this fiberization connectivity plan for us to collaborate. We've got 11 billion ringgit worth of 10 billion ringgit worth of funds. 10 to 11 billion funds to go and tap on. The government has basically said before this USP was only for specific projects. Now the government has said to fiberize and increase connectivity, you've got 10 billion ringgit of funds to go and tap on. But us operators are sitting there and saying, okay, whatever. Because you know why? They're not lucrative areas. And so if they're not going to be lucrative areas, we keep looking into our pockets. So at some point, I think that the government should crack the whip of economic regulation and say, look, you're making too much profit, you're making too little profit. I know people are unhappy because whenever it's said our market cap goes down and all the kind of malarkey, where big boys live with it now. Okay? And I think government should crack the whip and should whip us into shape. And that's going to be the critical mass, the critical point, whatever the right terminology is, for us to do something right on a national level.
All right, great. Mahtab, final comments?
So, final comment, just I would like to bring one issue which we have not talked about much, like the consumer that we have today. And thanks to our Uncle Trump, he has made 5G so popular. And that's why Suresh said at the beginning, even a driver asks him when 5G is coming, and he inquires about 5G. Now the problem that MNOs will be facing, there will be tremendous demand from consumers that we have today, whether they use 5G, whether they have 5G device or not, if they come to know this particular MNO has 5G, automatically the mindset and the usage pattern will move to that particular MNOs. So despite not having very good businesses at this point of time, any other operators in the market takes a first mover advantage. Without giving functionalities of 5G, that particular MNO might likely to take an advantage in the marketplace, in the mind of consumer. So that's a risk I see, and as an MNO, we should be mindful of that. We should not get into that trap with the kind of financial conditions that we have.
So I think with that, I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure members of the panel will be happy to share their more personal opinions than the more personal ones already shared here with you out there during the break. But I think excellent remarks from everyone. Big round of applause, please. Mahtab, Afzal, and Vaishali. So maybe in summary, is Infra ready to rumble? Maybe not quite yet. But if we listen to Ishal and Afzal, because he's sounding a lot more like a regulator every day. Yeah, you know,
I got hopeful when I heard the contract runs out next year.
Yeah. Sorry, is there a quick question there from Cloud? Yeah.
Thank you, Suresh. Actually, I would like to cheer Afzal a little bit because you've been so negative on fiber players. Actually, I would argue the opposite, is that this is the golden time to be in fiber business. There's been no better time to be in fiber than in regulators here, leading to fiber.
I think it's on purpose, by the way.
I would invite you to the best use case for you, and I won't go to Korea, but come to Hong Kong, where I understand the hottest targets have been in the entire telecom space in Hong Kong over the last several years has been fiber players. They've all been acquired, snapped out either by private equity or by other telecom players. And the hottest telecom company in all of Hong Kong today is a fiber company called Hong Kong Broadband. And so there is no better time to be in fiber. So granted, the last mile fiber to the home that you have perhaps is going to be under target from 5G, as you've very well explained. But you're not going to recover 60 cents on the dollar. I think you're going to recover $2 on the dollar. So that's.
I hope so. I hope so. Thanks for breaking my cover.
No, I think the shareholders are here, right? Yeah.
Because of all the front haul opportunities you're going to have, in addition to 70% of the towers that are not connected by fiber.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much. I think actually Hong Kong Broadband is a very interesting example, and also a very interesting example of culture change, which I think everyone should take a look at. Right. So maybe we're out of time. We're on the red light already. So final big round of applause. Thank you.